experts said the health benefits were only marginal, but the medical officers of all 4 UK nations have now been told to weigh up the wider implications.
I think it's a really good idea because it's not just us, like people can go back to work and school will be back in full function.
Also tonight, the border blame game. Heathrow criticises border force after some airport queues stretched to 5 hours. The unsung heroes, RAF pilots, talk of the risks they took in the Afghan evacuation.
The civilian airliners that were already parked there were completely covered in people with them on the wings, clambering all over the top of them. It was just utter chaos.
Back on form, Britain's Emma Raducanu threw in style to the last 16 of the US Open. And not 1, but 7 times a champion as more gold comes Britain's way in Tokyo.
This is ITV News with Chris Shipp.
Hello, good evening. It isn't the clarity parents and teachers want, but the mass vaccination countrywide of 12 to 15-year-olds could still get the green light, despite scientists concluding the health benefits for youngsters were only marginal. The reason why the UK's 4 chief medical officers are giving it further consideration is because they've been asked to assess the wider benefits for all of us of this age group being vaccinated, including fewer disruptions to their schooling. A final decision is expected within days. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks explains.
The start of the new term, when schools had been expecting to welcome pupils, not just with the return to lessons, but with a huge vaccination programme for 12 to 15-year-old pupils. With the decision on whether that can go ahead now in the hands of the UK's 4 chief medical officers, union leaders say once again pupils and teachers have been left stranded.
Well, it's another weekend, isn't it, for all of us, of speculation about what may or may not happen. I'm actually optimistic that what we're going to get is a fairly urgent decision on behalf of young people and their parents that vaccination of 12 to 15-year-olds will go ahead. We will welcome that we need to know the detail. But frankly, it's hugely frustrating that here we are once again with term for the majority of young people having started, and the people I represent, school and college leaders, still not knowing precisely what the details of all of that is. It's really not good enough.
The government is also said to be optimistic that vaccinations for the over 11s will go ahead, as they have in the US, Canada, Germany and many other countries. That despite the committee that advises the government deciding not to recommend vaccination for this age group. Chief medical officers will now look at whether the wider benefits to pupils outweigh any potential risks.
The kinds of factors the CMOs will be looking at will be the level of transmission of the virus in the community, including amongst young people, which we know is high at the current time and may increase as schools return in more parts of the UK. They'll also be considering the educational elements. What are the risks to young people of not being in school if they test positive or they're living with someone, for example, who tests positive?
With pupils having faced months of disruption to their education during the pandemic, most of these parents believe the government had missed a trick by not extending the vaccine programme before the start of term.
My 16-year-old recently had her vaccine, and for my 13-year-old, if it was available, then she would have it too.
My daughter wants to be vaccinated, and it's cross that she can't be. My whole family is vaccinated, and she's really keen to make sure that she's protecting her grandparents.
Over 11s with underlying health conditions will, like 16 and 17-year-olds, be eligible for the jab. A decision on their classmates is expected towards the end of next week.
And Romilly's here. It doesn't look like the chief medical officers are going to take that long to make a decision. So what do you think they will conclude?
Yes, towards the end of this coming week is what I've been told. The JCVI made their decision based on narrow criteria, looking at the medical benefits to children. Chris Whitty and his fellow CMOs are going to be looking at a much broader set of factors, and there seems to be a widespread expectation in government that that will tip the balance firmly in favour of vaccinating. The way it was put to me is that without prejudging the outcome of the review, there is a sense of optimism that this will happen. Parental consent will still be required for each individual child, of course, and some experts fear that the confusion surrounding this over the past few days may, in some cases, make that harder to secure.
Yeah, a big decision. Thank you, Romilly. Bosses at Heathrow have publicly criticised the Home Office and Border Force for what the airport called unacceptable queuing times because there simply were not enough passport control officers. A passenger passed us this video and they told us they landed at Terminal 5 last night to face these lengthy queues. It said some wait times for arrivals were as much as 4 to 5 hours. Heathrow said in a statement that we are very sorry that passengers faced unacceptable queuing times in immigration last night due to too few Border Force officers on duty. Border Force hasn't responded directly, but their bosses, the Home Office, have agreed the delays are unacceptable and they say they are rapidly reviewing staff rosters. Now, the bravery and heroism of the RAF crews who flew emergency flights in and out of Kabul over the past week or so has been revealed. Today, for the first time, they spoke of the chaos and desperate scenes they had to face, including near misses with vehicles on the runway as thousands tried to flee the Taliban. John Ray has their stories.
There is heroism even in retreat. A quality required by those who flew these huge RAF transporters into harm's way, risking their lives to save thousands more.
You could see the airfield was completely overrun. There was people on the taxiways, people on the southern apron. The civilian airliners that were already parked there were completely covered in people with them on the wings, clambering all over the top of them. It was just utter chaos.
And amid that chaos, threatening to overwhelm any plan for an ordered withdrawal, there was often great danger.
It was a ground attack to the south side, so the US Marines in the tower called incoming and base under attack. We had some rounds impacting the ground around our aircraft while we howled short of the runway. And I recall an American helicopter pilot calling mortars inbound, and he flew off to have a look at the mortar tube.
Wing Commander Kev Lachman was approaching takeoff with more than 300 Afghans on board when a bus full of evacuees veered across the runway.
We were about 95 knots and they were about 1,000 feet ahead of us, and we realised that we wouldn't have been able to reject the takeoff because if I tried to reject, then I would have basically cleaned up the bus and taken out the bus, and that doesn't really bear thinking about. So I had to continue the takeoff. We got airborne and we just missed the bus by probably about 10-15 feet.
The British flew dozens of missions to rescue terrified and exhausted men, women and children.
The conditions were stark. You know, when you look down the back, you've got anxious faces. You had some people who didn't think they were going to leave Afghanistan, some harrowing circumstances, but also, you know, there was relief and there was hope, and people were quite happy to be leaving Afghanistan.
It is no consolation to those left to take their chances with the Taliban that in all, Britain evacuated some 8,000 Afghans, more than at first seemed likely. And in that, those who made it possible take pride. John Ray, ITV News.
Now, after her early hopes ended up being dashed at Wimbledon, Britain's teenage tennis star Emma Raducanu smashed her way through to the fourth round of the US Open tonight, and in some style. As Toby Sadler reports, it was a dominant performance by Raducanu against a strong opponent.
From the very first ball, Emma Raducanu set the tone for what was to come. Her first point won quickly became her first game, then a second, third, fourth and fifth. With just over half an hour gone, her Spanish opponent Sara Sorribes Tormo was facing set point and a 6-love thrashing.
It is a demolition.
No one predicted this. Emma Raducanu is ranked 150th in the world. Sara Sorribes Tormo is world number 41 and known as a tough opponent. But there was little let-up in the second set. Raducanu won 11 games straight before Sorribes Tormo pulled one back. Raducanu did miss a match point and tighten up a little when serving for the eventual win, but these are minor wrinkles in an otherwise faultless performance. It was then to selfies and signatures for a crowd who now have a "I was there" story to tell. Next is a possible meeting with world number 1 Ash Barty. Toby Sadler, ITV News.
To the World Cup qualifiers now, and Scotland had a must-win match at Hampden Park tonight against Moldova. And they took the 3 points they needed when Lyndon Dykes scored early on. There were plenty of other chances for Scotland to increase their lead, but in the end, one goal was enough. It finished 1-0. Finally, the Games come to an end tomorrow, and if Paralympics GB has another day as good as today, they look set to seal their second place in the medals table. Today saw another 4 golds, and as Sam Holder reports, their success in the last couple of weeks is inspiring a new generation of Paralympians.
Cockcroft is already well out in front.
If one gold was never in doubt, it was Hannah Cockcroft in the 800 metres. Just take a look at the gap between her and the rest of the competition.
She's cruising out in front.
Every time she's competed at the Paralympics, she's won gold, and this was no exception. Her victory even more impressive as she trapped her hand in her wheelchair just before the race.
Such a drama queen. Yeah, I had a bit of an accident in the warm-up. I've never had an injury before, so I decided that prior to my 800-metre final, I would try it out for the first time.
Which Brit will go on and take the gold medal?
In the canoe sprints, there was a flurry of medals for Britain. Gold in the KL2 for Charlotte Henshaw. Last Paralympics, she was in the water as a swimmer. And in KL3, Laura Sugar took gold. At Rio, she was on solid ground, competing in track and field. It was London 2012 that brought the Paralympics to the public eye, inspiring many of Britain's current athletes. Below the London Stadium, today they were inspiring the next generation to take up sport. Like Ellen, who got this gold for rowing in Tokyo.
Have you taken it off yet?
Yes, I have done. A lot of people have held it, and I'm worried that they might steal it sometimes.
It felt a bit like Taekwondo vying to touch her gold medal, but this is what it meant.
Do you do any sports? And if so, do you think maybe one day you might be at the Paralympics?
Well, I think, yeah, I do some sports. I do running, and yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah, you've been inspired by what you've seen today. And did you get to hold a gold medal?
Yeah, 2 actually.
2 of Britain's 41 gold medals so far. Aled Davis is the latest to add to the tally, getting gold in the shot put. Sam Holder, ITV News.
So that's good news on the tennis court, the football pitch and at the Paralympics. A good place to end. Good night.